Hi, everyone. Welcome to Both Sides of the Story. I'm your host, Alan Janae from CBS 4. Thanks for joining us. This is the second of our 4 preliminary rounds of our 2020 tournament, featuring 8 students from 8 different high schools. And we have a brand new element this year. We have added a consolation bracket, so you'll get a chance to see all of our students debate multiple times this season. On tonight's show, students from Denver's George Washington High School and Holy Family High School face off. So let's meet them right now. First is Katie Jack. She's a junior at George Washington High School.
My name's Katie Jack, and I'm a junior at George Washington High School. One of my favorite moments in debate was probably participating in the online nationals tournament this year. I had a team that I was debating with, and we all got to talk about these really important issues, and it was just with people who also cared about them a lot. So it was a really powerful experience for me. Debate's really important right now because it teaches young people how to use their voices in order to stand up for something that they believe in. And I think that's really important in light of this pandemic and also in light of the Black Lives Matter movement and other important social movements that are pushing for progress and change. And the way that those two things come is by young people and people of all ages being able to speak up for what they believe in. And speech and debate directly teaches individuals how to do that.
Every time I see her on one of our Google Meet calls, she's so happy and so enthusiastic that I feel I can be happy and enthusiastic as well. And we're going to get through this.
She's going to be a tough competitor. Next is Michael Dolph, a senior from Holy Family High School. Let's hear his story.
My name is Michael Dolph. I am a senior at Holy Family High School. Debates taught me to work hard at something, and it's really taught me how to love doing what you do. Not just doing it because it's something to do or because it's fun, but doing it because I love that thing. It's taught me passion, I think.
Michael is a very charismatic, funny kid who has really, speech and debate has been one of the best things for him to draw out what's best in Michael. He, this year, is one of our captains. He's showing tremendous leadership. He is really looking to make Holy Family Debate really successful. And he's just a profoundly curious, hardworking kid. So glad to have him on our team.
Michael's of championship caliber, too. Also joining us on our special panel tonight of experts who will offer their analysis of this debate. They are Dominic Dezzutti, host of Colorado Decides, the election debate series produced in conjunction with CBS 4. He is joined by Lucy Haggard, a reporter from the Colorado Sun. All right, time to set the ground rules. Each side will present their case, ask each other questions, and have a chance to offer rebuttals. Both students have prepared a pro and a con case for tonight's debate. They won't know which side they'll defend until we have a coin flip right here in our studio. When it's finished, we'll go to our illustrious panel for their own questions, and we'll find out who they felt offered the best arguments. So let's get started right now. The issue up for debate this time is, do the benefits of creating the United States Space Force outweigh the harms? Let's have our coin flip right now and get ourselves underway. Katie, I'm going to let you call it because you are to my left. So let me know. What's your call, heads or tails?
Heads.
Heads it is. So you choose. What would you like, the affirmative or the negative?
I'll be affirmative.
Katie Jack, as the proponent during this round, we begin with you on this question, and the floor is yours for 3 minutes. Go right ahead.
All right. I affirm the resolution. The benefits of creating the United States Space Force outweigh the harm. According to their website, the Space Force, which was founded in December 2019, is a military service that organizes, trains, and equips space forces in order to protect U.S. and allied interests in space and to provide space capabilities to the joint force. My first contention is that the Space Force is a much more efficient alternative to the previous system for the defense of space. According to Todd Harrison, director of the Aerospace Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in 2018, there are 3 central problems with how U.S. national security space is organized today. First, authority and
responsibility for space is fragmented. There are more than 60 different organizations with responsibility for space acquisitions. This lack of centralized leadership leads to slow decision-making, disunity of effort in building new space capabilities, and a lack of accountability when space programs go over budget or fall far behind schedule. The second problem is that the space workforce is scattered across the services and intelligence agencies, with too few people in each organization to create a viable and attractive career path. The third core problem is that the services have inherent conflicts of interest when it comes to space. The creation of the Space Force has solved these critical issues and allowed for the United States to have a better system for the protection of their interests in space. My second contention is that the Space Force will help the U.S. better protect our satellites and maintain authority in space. According to Dr. Malcolm Davis, a senior analyst at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute in 2018, ensuring access to space is critical to a Western way of war that emphasizes speed, precision, and discrimination to minimize risk of friendly and collateral casualties. To lose access to space means we lose the war and we lose it quickly. By ensuring this access, the United States will be better able to protect its satellites. According to David Montgomery in the Washington Post magazine in 2019, satellites enable phone calls, track the weather, monitor environmental disasters, and help chart the course of climate change. Satellites are there to provide early warning of nuclear attack, coordinate missile interceptors, and keep watch on other powers' adherence to arms control treaties. It should make us nervous that China has demonstrated the ability to shoot down satellites with missiles. India did the same this past spring, and Russia is testing such a weapon. Dr. Malcolm Davis further describes the threat of our satellites from foreign nations when he writes, China is now operationally deploying anti-satellite weapons that could hold at-risk U.S. and allied ISR satellites, and are developing more sophisticated capabilities that could potentially target GPS and communication satellites. The need for the protection of our satellites is incredibly evident. The Space Force's role in this task is best articulated by David Montgomery when he writes, creating a Space Force would foster a singular military space culture, which would nurture innovation in satellite strategy and defense, strengthen earthbound forces, and potentially help safeguard future spacefaring. Therefore, the Space Force is the best way to protect American satellites and prevent the United States from falling behind other countries in the race to assert power in space. These benefits clearly outweigh any potential drawbacks and are the reasons I am proud to stand in affirmation. I am now open for cross-examination.
All right, Katie, thank you very much. Now, Michael, you have 2 minutes for any questions as well as that cross-examination. Go right ahead.
Awesome. Katie, do you believe that space should be used for peaceful purposes?
Yes, and that's why I think that the Space Force is so important, because it's making sure that we're going to prevent these countries from using anti-satellite weapons against our and our allied satellites.
So are you aware that the Space Force references their soldiers as war fighters throughout their entire doctrine called space power?
Sure. Well, it's part of military service.
Okay.
But what
it was just a yes or no question. Are you aware that they call their soldiers war fighters?
They're part of the military branch, so I would assume so. But what I'd like to
clarify, fantastic. So if that is if they are just called war fighters, how can war fighters be intended for anything peaceful?
Okay, so ideally, space should be a place where we maintain peace, and the Space Force will help us to do that because it's protecting us from anti-satellite weapons. The issue is that these countries have demonstrated the ability to shoot down our satellites. So it's not necessarily a place of peace right now because they're threatening us with this. We need to protect us, and I clearly demonstrated within my first contention that the Space Force is going to be the best way to do this.
Fantastic. So you are aware the United States also possesses anti-satellite weapons, correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And do you think the purpose of the USSF is just to protect satellites, or do you also recognize that there are other agendas there?
Whatever agendas would you be referring to?
Talking about their core mission, right? Star Delta, I believe it's recognized. It is specifically to develop doctrine for fighting wars in space. Mm-hmm. You would recognize that is another intention of the Space Force as well?
The reason for that would be because these other countries have demonstrated the ability to shoot down satellites. Obviously, we need to be prepared in order to face a certain situation like that. And we already had organizations that were devoted to that exact same mission. Creating the Space Force doesn't change that we have people who are trying to solve that problem and trying to be prepared for certain disasters. The Space Force is just a more effective and better way of accomplishing this goal.
All right, we're going to have to wrap up the questions right there. Katie, you had your opportunity to state the affirmative to the question, do the benefits of creating the United States Space Force outweigh the harms? Now, Michael, you're in the negative. The floor is yours for 3 minutes. Go right ahead.
The United States Space Force, or USSF, is the first new branch of the military in almost a century. Because the USSF is redundant and actively invites aggression, I must argue today that its creation will yield far more harms than benefits. Before we begin, let us remember the words of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who in 1961 gave this powerful warning, quote, "In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist," end quote. This newest military branch is precisely what President Eisenhower warned us against. His words outline the two most substantial harms of its creation. First, the USSF threatens existing treaties and makes forging new ones nigh impossible. Second is the unwarranted influence in space, which will damage international cooperation and cause an unnecessary escalation of military threats. The Outer Space Treaty, or OST, forms the basis of international space law. In 1967, 110 countries signed the treaty. Its intent can best be described as, quote, "The states party to this treaty desire to contribute to broad international cooperation in the scientific as well as the legal aspects of exploration and the use of outer space for peaceful purposes," end quote. Contrast this with the mission statement of the USSF, which uses the word military 4 times, force twice, and peace 0. Nothing about our newest military branch purports to meet the objectives of a treaty we helped write. The intention of the USSF is quite evident, and it is not for the peaceful use of space. One of the major consequences of such an inherently aggressive act as creating a new branch of the military specifically to fight wars in space is that it is incredibly instigatory towards other world powers. As the US builds up our own military presence in space, other nations will move to stake their own claim. Last year, as President Trump and Congress moved towards the creation of the USSF, China's foreign ministry spokesperson said, quote, "The relevant US actions are a serious violation of the international consensus on the peaceful use of outer space. They undermine global stability and pose a direct threat to outer space peace," end quote. The militarization of space is a clear harm to the terrestrial work of international diplomacy and power sharing inherent in global peace. China and Russia will work to meet militarized space domain, increasing already volatile international relations. In conjunction, these two harms outweigh any perceived benefits of creating the United States Space Force. Thank you.
Michael, thank you very much. Michael in the negative, Katie in favor. And now you have 2 minutes, Katie, for questions and cross-examination. Go right ahead.
Okay, I want to start by discussing your statement about treaties. So you would agree with me that we already had departments within the US government that were devoted to protecting Americans' interests in space. Is that correct?
Well, so there was a small branch inside of the Air Force, right? That's absolutely correct. But the fact of the matter is that the United States Space Force does a thing that the Air Force wasn't doing, right? Especially with their mission Star Delta. It is specifically to train, and I quote, war fighters to fight wars in space.
Okay, so then would you disagree with the definition from their own website that says that its goal is to protect US and allied interests in space and provide space capabilities to the joint force? That's their own definition of what their mission is.
Right, so that's their definition, but it would be ignorant to think that that's entirely defensive, right? Protection, at least in regards to the military, in their eyes, it wouldn't just be a defensive game. It's also about offensive as well.
Okay, so what evidence do you have to support your claim that the Air Force wasn't offensive or wasn't part of a military mission in order to keep our space safe?
The fact that the doctrine needs to be developed now, right? So if they're developing the doctrine for fighting in space, it means that it didn't exist before.
Okay, I would disagree with that. But moving on to your point about unwarranted escalation, these countries like China and Russia were already developing their anti-satellite weapons. So weren't they already violating this treaty?
No, so the OST doesn't illegalize anti-satellite weapons, right? The United States was one of the first countries to make them ourselves, right? So it was more likely in response to the fact that we had these weapons. If not, like, again, so we have, in this case, both countries would have anti-satellite weapons.
Okay, so
and
then
you see the exact cause and
protect
effect.
our satellites without the Space Force.
Protect our satellites without the Space Force. I think that it's highly unrealistic to think that peace isn't the answer to this, right? Let's not attack each other's satellites. There are much better ways to go about ensuring that than putting weapons in space.
All right, Katie, we're going to have to cut off the questions there, but you now have 2 minutes for a rebuttal. Go right ahead.
All right, I'd like to be going over the main points that my opponent made within his case. So starting off, he gives this quote from Eisenhower saying that we need to avoid unwarranted influence. And what I'd like to point out here is that the influence that we need within space at this time is absolutely warranted because of the threats that other countries are causing to our satellites. And I'll go into more detail with that in a second. Then he brings up there's two harms. His first harm is saying that it threatens existing treaties. And he brings up this treaty from a while ago talking about how you should try to maintain peace within space. But this treaty also allows for the building of anti-satellite weapons. So I would argue that it's not necessarily accomplishing its original goal. What we see here in the status quo is that there are other countries developing their own anti-satellite weapons, and it's really critical that we're able to protect ourselves against this. This isn't a need that's really necessarily disputed. It's more of a matter of fact of how are we going to best protect this, and that's what I'm talking about within my first contention, where I discuss how in 2018, when Todd Harrison was speaking, he discussed how there were these big problems with how we were protecting our satellites in space and how we were asserting authority. And those problems were talking about how there was a lack of centralized leadership and how there couldn't be an attractive career path within the space force. And then also talked about how the services have inherent conflicts of interest when it comes to space. So these problems are solved by the Space Force, which allows for us to effectively address the problems that we see and effectively protect our satellites, which, like I described within my case, are so critical. His second point was talking about unwarranted escalation. But again, other nations are creating anti-satellite weapons and have demonstrated that they can use them. So this is why it's so important that we're able to protect them. And he didn't provide any alternative for how we're going to protect our necessary satellites besides just peace, but he doesn't really describe what this looks like because that's not what we have in the status quo. We need to meet the challenge that we're faced with right now. And the Space Force is the best and most effective way to do it. We had other organizations in the past that had this mission, but they weren't able to effectively accomplish it because they were spread out. The Space Force centralizes everything and makes it more effective.
Okay, Katie, we'll have to hold off right there. You're watching two of the top debaters in Colorado high schools talk about the issue of do the benefits of creating the United States Space Force outweigh the harms? Katie in the affirmative, Michael in the negative. Michael, you now have 3 minutes to respond and close. Go right ahead.
Great. So I'd like to start off with my opponent's first contention, where she explicitly references how the Space Force is a more effective means for space defense. Now, first of all, let's talk about this impact is ultimately going to be outweighed in this debate. But secondly, my opponent's basically argument is fundamentally flawed because she assumes that weapons are the only way to protect something. And I will get back to this point later, but it's ultimately important to realize that that is a false mindset. Moving on to my opponent's second contention, where she talks about the necessity of protecting satellites. First of all, the United States already possesses anti-satellite weapons as well. It is ignorant of us to assume that China and Russia aren't also going to amass those weapons. That's what happens. That's what my case is talking about. When you build weapons, when you amass weapons, when you make a new branch of the military, the instant cause and effect that we see is other world powers are going to pursue that exact thing. That is the mindset of the affirmative that is fundamentally problematic and is going to lead you to the exact negative effects that I was talking about throughout my case. And also to answer my opponent's question where she said, how else are we going to get to peace? The solution is pretty simple. We are so ingrained in China's economy that they're not going to blow up our satellites, because if they blow up our satellites, we're going to stop trading with them. That is the way to get to peace in the status quo. It's through globalization. It's not through creating more weapons and putting them in space, right? The USSF, my opponent assumes that weapons are the only answer. And this is a fundamentally false mindset to approach. That is exactly why we don't have peace in the status quo. It's because we have always been pursuing and assumed that the answer to our problems is to put a bigger gun in the face of our problems. It's just false. Space should only be used for peaceful purposes. Me, my opponent, and frankly, most of the world agree with this mindset. Nothing about the USSF is in the pursuit of peace. Nothing about the USSF is to ensure it is entirely to develop procedures for fighting wars in space. It is an instigatory act that's going to create conflict, not solve it. That is the main impact of why creating of the USSF outweighs any of the perceived benefits that it might have. Again, just to hit this one more time, this is a fundamental. Just to show you this, they call their trained military personnel war fighters. Nothing about war fighters. Their purpose can't be for anything besides fighting wars, right? Again, it's not a peaceful purpose. Nothing about creating the United States Space Force is going to lead us towards global peace, is going to lead us towards not fighting, right? The solution to my opponent's perceived question that she asked me, how are we going to protect our satellites? It's by making peace with other world powers. It's by through increasing globalization and trade. It's not through weaponizing space. And it's for these reasons that I negate the resolution. Thank you.
Michael, thank you very much. Finally, Katie, you have 1 minute to close. Go right ahead.
Okay, firstly, I'd like to respond to a couple things that my opponent just said. He's talking about how peace can be achieved through globalization, but we still face the problem that we have today, even though our world has absolutely moved towards globalization. If the relationship between China and the United States would prevent China from creating anti-satellite weapons and testing those weapons, then we wouldn't have a problem that we see in the status quo. Instead, the solution has to be more than that, and it has to be having a strong military force that's able to protect our interests in space. And then he's also making this claim throughout his entire case, talking about how the Space Force is not in favor of peace, but this is largely just his own interpretation of a word warfighter. He's ignoring the specific definition I give from the Space Force itself that's saying the military service is designed to organize, train, and equip Space Forces in order to protect U.S. and allied interests. It's about defense. That's coming from the word protection. And it's talking about how we're going to develop military space professionals, acquire military space systems, and mature the military doctrine for space power, and organize Space Force to present our combatant commands. So this need is very evident. It has always been there. The Space Force is just a better way to accomplish that. And that's all the evidence that I provide within my first contention.
Katie Jack from George Washington, Michael Dolph from Holy Family, debating the issue of the United States Space Force. Thanks very much for the spirited debate, but it's not over. Let's go to our panel of experts, get their thoughts and their questions. Dominic, take it away.
Alan, thank you very much. It's debates like this that get me just so jazzed about this series, because this is why our viewers across the state need to see this kind of talent. Well done on both sides. Really great debate. But as Alan said, it's not done. We're going to ask you a couple of questions ourselves. Lucy, why don't you ask Katie your first question?
Yeah, Katie, we are talking about the benefits versus the harms of U.S. Space Force, and I'm wondering what the benefits any average citizen would see from having U.S. Space Force.
Sure. So I talk about within my second contention about how satellites are so vital to our daily lives. And so what's important here is that we are very much affected by the safety of our satellites, and that safety is directly in danger because of these other countries testing their anti-satellite weapons. That's why we see the need for the United States to be able to assert some authority within space. And this is something that already existed before the Space Force was created. It just was not a very effective system for the reasons that I provided within my first contention.
Well, Katie, I want to follow up on that question about the other way it was done. The Space Force can seem to some as superfluous. Why can't your main contention, which is about efficiency, why cannot all that be done under the United States Air Force with simply more efficient leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Todd Harrison card goes into that, and it's talking about how there were three main problems with the fact that it was underneath the Air Force and also spread across different organizations within the Department of Defense. And so they talk about how there's a lack of centralized leadership when you have that approach, and that is necessary in order for there to be an effective way to protect our interests in space. The second problem is that the space workforce was scattered across the services, so there was no attractive career path. People couldn't build up a lot of experience within protecting America's interests in space. And then lastly, it's that the services have inherent conflicts of interest when it comes to space. So the Air Force was not actually targeting the problems that we were seeing with other countries testing their anti-satellite weapons, which is why we see the need to create a separate force like the Space Force in order to protect our interests in space.
Michael, it's your turn for the hot seat. Lucy?
Michael, I'll ask you your version of what I asked Katie. What are the harms that everyday citizens would see as having Space Force exist?
So the average day citizen isn't going to see any immediate harms from the institution of the Space Force. Rather, the effects are going to be more long-reaching. First of all, the Space Force is going to make any sort of global collaboration towards the peaceful use of space incredibly difficult, specifically because we are militarizing space, right? And so the perceived consequences of that is more likely than not in the next few centuries, we're going to see some form of global space conflict. We're going to see a war in space, and that is going to be the biggest negative effect that your average day citizen is going to have to deal with.
Michael, let me follow up on that one by saying a lot of your case is based on the idea that the Space Force is built for war and not peace. But how is that different from any other armed forces in the United States that are also keeping the peace by being ready for war?
So again, historically, we can't eliminate those forces of the military. I'm saying that we shouldn't create a new one because it is inherently instigatory, right? We're aggravating other world powers, and it's going to lead to conflict, right? But it's not different than any other military branch. That's absolutely correct. But the problem with that is that historically, military branches haven't been exceptionally good at keeping peace. The United States hasn't been at peace in an incredibly long time.
You both did a fantastic job. We're going to need a little bit of time here, Alan, as much as you can give us, so that we can make a decision. Again, a fantastic debate on both sides. It's given the judges their money's worth.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I've been back and forth on this one several times, so good luck with that. We'll give our panel a moment to try and figure out who they felt won this debate. That gives me a moment to let you know that we're just beginning our new expanded season of Both Sides of the Story. Our 2020 tournament will feature 12 total debates, including a full consolation bracket, so you'll get a chance to see all of our students debate multiple times this fall. To catch up on any of the episodes, go to pbs12.org. All right, panel, here is the moment. Do you have a decision, Dominic?
We do, but frankly, we would just rather sit back and enjoy both these talented debaters go at it for some more time. It was a real treat to be able to watch this. You both did a fantastic job with both your cases and the cross-examination. That is not easy, especially in this kind of remote format. You both did well, and the rebuttals were great too. But we have to pick a winner. That's our job. We decided that, Katie, you won this round, very close round, but congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Katie, Jack, congratulations. And Michael, Dolph, a well done debate. Congratulations to you as well. And thank you both. You gave our viewers a wonderful debate tonight. Both of you should be very proud. Now, Katie, you're going to go on to compete against the winner from our previous debate, which featured students from Denver East and Mountain Vista High School. And Michael, we're going to see you again in our consolation bracket debates, and those are tough too. That's all the time we have for our program tonight. I want to thank our excellent students for accepting our challenge and for participating in our debate. I also want to thank our esteemed panel for sharing their thoughts. And finally, thank you for tuning in. It's the support of viewers like you and our sponsors that helps to make this show a reality. You can catch up on past episodes of this program at pbs12.org. You can always catch me on CBS 4 for the latest on news and information impacting the state of Colorado. And for everybody here at PBS 12, I'm Alan Janay. Thanks for watching, and that is Both Sides of the Story.